The debt collector, the morning that changed everything, started like any other. Sophia Martinez hummed softly as she prepared her art supplies, sunlight streaming through the windows of her small classroom. At 24, she had built a simple but fulfilling life, teaching children to express themselves through paint and clay. Her students' colorful artwork covered the walls, pure joy captured in crayon and watercolor. Never imagined her own life would soon be painted in shades of gray. The knock came during lunch break. Sophia opened the door to find a man in an expensive suit, looking entirely out of place in their modest neighborhood. His briefcase gleamed with the kind of polish that spoke of serious money. "Miss Martinez, I'm here regarding your family's account with Blackwood Industries." The name hit her like ice water. Everyone knew the Blackwoods' old money, new power, and a reputation for getting what they wanted. "There must be some mistake," Sophia said. But the man was already extending a thick envelope bearing an ornate family crest. "No mistake, miss. This matter requires immediate attention." Her mother, Alina, appeared in the doorway, and Sophia watched the color drain from her weathered face. Her hands trembled as she stared at the envelope. "Mama, what's wrong?" Alina's voice cracked like autumn leaves. "Your father ... before he died ... he made arrangements. I prayed they would forget." Inside their tiny kitchen, Sophia read the contract once, twice, 3 times. The legal language was complex, but the meaning was devastatingly clear. 15 years ago, when she was just 9, her father had borrowed $3 million from Blackwood Industries. The debt had never been repaid, and now, with accumulated interest, it had grown to $8 million. The collateral clause made her stomach turn. In his desperation, her father had offered something that wasn't his to give his daughter's future. "This can't be legal," Sophia whispered, but even as she spoke, she knew it was. Her father's signature was there, bold and desperate. Next, to witness seals that made the contract ironclad. "The Blackwoods always collect their debts," Alina said through her tears. "Damian Blackwood doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget." 3 days later, a black sedan pulled up to their house. Sophia watched from her window as a man stepped out, and she understood immediately why people feared the Blackwood name. Damian Blackwood moved like he owned the world around him. Tall and imposing, with dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds, he radiated power that made the air itself seem to bend to his will. His charcoal suit probably cost more than Sophia made. "In 6 months, Miss Martinez," he said when she opened the door, his voice smooth but cold as winter steel. "I trust you've reviewed the documentation." Sophia stood on her porch, chin raised despite the fear racing through her veins. "I've read it. That doesn't mean I agree to it." A slight smile played at the corner of his mouth, but it held no warmth. "Agreement isn't required. Your father's signature is binding. My father is dead. His debts should be too." An older man stepped forward, Vincent Torres, according to his introduction, Damian's lawyer. He had kind eyes that seemed apologetic for what he was being forced to orchestrate. "Miss Martinez," Vincent said gently, "there are certain protections in place. This arrangement doesn't require ... intimacy. It's merely a legal marriage, a business transaction." Sophia's laugh was bitter. "How considerate." Damian's jaw tightened. "You have 1 hour to pack your belongings. We'll handle the legal formalities this afternoon." As the reality crashed over her, Sophia realized her simple life was about to end. She was about to become property of a man who looked at her like she was nothing more than a business expense. But as she stared into those storm-gray eyes, she caught something else lurking beneath the cold facade, flicker of pain that was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. 1 hour. 1 hour to say goodbye to the life she'd built, the dreams she'd painted, and the freedom she'd taken for granted. The unwilling bride, the courthouse smelled of dust and bureaucracy, its fluorescent lights casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow. Sophia wore a simple blue dress that her mother had pressed with shaking hands, the closest thing to wedding attire she could manage on such short notice. There were no flowers, no music, no guests who cared about their happiness. The judge, clearly uncomfortable but legally bound to proceed, mumbled through the brief ceremony with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. When he reached the traditional words about speaking now or forever holding peace, the silence stretched like a held breath. Sophia glanced at Damian, standing rigid beside her, his face a mask of cold indifference. "Do you, Damian Alexander Blackwood, take Sophia Elena Martinez to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The words came out flat, businesslike, as if he were confirming a stock purchase. "Do you, Sophia Elena Martinez, take Damian Alexander Blackwood to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Sophia looked at this stranger who was about to own her life. For just a moment, she saw something flicker behind his cold facade, pain, maybe, or regret. But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "I do," she whispered, because what choice did she have? The judge pronounced them married, and Damian turned away before the traditional kiss could even be suggested. The gold band he slipped onto her finger felt like a shackle. The drive to Blackwood Estate took 45 minutes through winding roads that led away from everything familiar. Sophia pressed her face to the window, watching her old life disappear behind towering trees and iron gates that clicked shut with an air of finality. The mansion rose before them like something from a Gothic novel, all sharp angles and dark windows that seemed to watch her approach. It was beautiful in a cold, untouchable way, just like its owner. "Rosa will show you to your room," Damian said as they entered the marble foyer. His voice echoed in the vast space. "Dinner is at 7. Don't be late." The housekeeper, a woman in her 50s with gentle eyes and graying hair, pulled back in a neat bun, led Sophia up a grand staircase. Rosa had the careful neutrality of someone who had learned to keep her thoughts to herself. "This will be your room, Mrs. Blackwood," Rosa said, opening a door to reveal a space larger than Sophia's entire childhood bedroom. It was decorated in soft grays and whites, elegant but impersonal, like a hotel room designed by someone who had never experienced warmth. "Please, just call me Sophia." Rosa smiled for the first time. The master can be difficult, but he's not cruel. There's a difference, though it might take time to see it. That evening, Sophia dressed carefully in a simple black dress and made her way to the dining room. The table could have seated 20 people, but only 2 places were set, far apart from each other, as if they were dining in separate worlds. Damian was already there, having changed from his suit into dark slacks and a white shirt that made his eyes look even more stormy. They ate in silence for several minutes, the only sound the clink of silverware against fine china. Finally, Sophia couldn't bear it anymore. "So this is how it's going to be?" she asked. "We ignore each other and pretend this isn't happening." Damian looked up from his meal, his expression unreadable. "What would you prefer? Small talk about the weather?" "I'd prefer honesty," you abuse-lidded. "Want this any more than I did?" "So why go through with it?" He set down his fork carefully, and for a moment she thought she saw his composure crack. "Because some debts can only be paid in full. Your father understood that when he signed the contract. What did he take from you that was worth this?" It's something dangerous flashed in Damian's eyes. "More than you could possibly understand. Try me." For a heartbeat, she thought he might actually tell her. Then the walls came back up, higher than before. "Your father borrowed $3 million. Interest over 15 years brings the total to $8 million. Are you prepared to write me a check, Mrs. Blackwood?" The formal use of her new name stung more than it should have. "No, I can't." "Then we understand each other perfectly." He stood, his meal barely touched. "Your room is comfortable. Your needs will be met, and you'll be treated with the respect due to your position. That's more than most people in debt to my family can expect." He walked away, leaving Sophia alone in the vast dining room, surrounded by wealth she couldn't touch and married to a man who seemed determined to remain a stranger. But as she sat there in the silence, she couldn't shake the memory of that flicker of pain in his eyes, or Rosa's words about the difference between difficult and cruel.
Ow.
Maybe there was more to Damian Blackwood than the cold mask he wore. Maybe she was just desperately hoping for something that wasn't there. Cracks in the armor. The first 2 weeks at Blackwood Estate passed in a strange routine. Sophia spent her days exploring the vast property, the library with its floor-to-ceiling shelves, the conservatory filled with exotic plants, the art studio that someone had clearly abandoned long ago. Damian disappeared each morning in his black sedan and returned after dark. maintaining the careful distance he'd established on their wedding night. It might have continued that way indefinitely if Sophia hadn't discovered the garden. Hidden behind the east wing of the mansion, accessible only through a narrow path overgrown with ivy, lay what had once been a magnificent rose garden now. It was a tangle of thorns and weeds, beautiful flowers choked by neglect. Something about its abandoned state called to her artist's heart. She was kneeling in the dirt, carefully pruning a particularly stubborn rosebush, when his shadow fell across her. "What are you doing?" Sophia looked up to find Damian standing at the garden's entrance, his usual composed mask slipping into something harder, more dangerous. "I found this place yesterday," she said, sitting back on her heels. "It must have been beautiful once. Thought I might try to don't." The word came out sharp enough to cut. "Leave it alone. But it just needs care. These roses, they're still alive underneath all the eyes," said, "Don't touch it." His voice carried a warning that made her stomach tighten. Some things are meant to stay buried. He turned and walked away, leaving Sophia kneeling among the thorns, more confused than ever. That night at dinner, the silence felt different, charged with unspoken tension. Finally, Sophia couldn't stand it anymore. Whose garden was it? Damian's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "I told you to leave it alone. Everything in this house has history. The paintings, the furniture, even the way Rosa arranges the flowers. But that garden, ... it's like a shrine to something dead." Maybe because it is. The words hung between them, heavy with pain. For a moment, Damian's careful mask slipped completely, and Sophia saw raw grief in his eyes before he looked away. "My mother planted those roses," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "She spent hours there, said it was her escape from the world. When she died, my father had the gardener stop maintaining it. Said it was a waste of money." "How old were you? 12? The single word carried 15 years of buried pain. Sophia felt something shift in her chest, not quite sympathy, but understanding. "She must have loved you very much to create something that beautiful." Damian's laugh was bitter. "She loved the idea of me. The perfect son who would carry on. The Blackwood legacy. She never lived to see how I turned out." "What happened to her?" For a long moment, Sophia thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was hollow. "Car accident. She was coming home from one of my school events. If I hadn't forgotten my science project, if she hadn't had to drive back, ... He stopped, his jaw clenching. "Your father was the driver of the other car." The world seemed to tilt. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. "What?" "He was drunk. Crossed the center line on Canyon Road. My mother died instantly. He walked away with scratches." Everything suddenly made terrible sense: the debt, the contract, the cold fury in Damian's eyes whenever he looked at her. "You're not collecting a debt," Sophia whispered. "You're collecting revenge." Damian met her gaze, and she saw the truth written in the storm of his eyes. "Your father took everything from me, my mother, my childhood, any chance I had at becoming something other than this." He gestured at himself with self-loathing. "Yes, I took something from him in return, but he's dead. You're punishing me for something I didn't even know about." "Life isn't fair, Sophia. I learned that at 12 years old." She stood from the table, her legs unsteady. "So that's it? I'm going to spend the rest of my life paying for my father's mistakes. You're going to spend the rest of your life remembering that actions have consequences, even the ones we don't choose to live with." Sophia walked away from the table, but instead of going to her room, she found herself back in the garden. Under the moonlight, the neglected roses looked even more haunting, like ghostly reminders of love that had been cut short. She understood now why Damian couldn't bear to see it restored. To him, those dead roses were all he had left of his mother, and bringing them back to life would mean letting go of his grief, his anger, his need for vengeance. But as she knelt among the thorns again, carefully clearing away the weeds by moonlight, Sophia realized something else. The roots were still strong, still alive beneath all that decay. With the right care, with patience and love, even the most damaged things could bloom again. Maybe gardens weren't the only things that could be healed. The question was whether Damian would let her try or if his need for revenge ran too deep to ever let light in again. The Garden of Healing, despite Damian's warning, Sophia returned to the garden every day. She worked quietly, methodically, clearing away years of neglect. She didn't do it to defy him. She did it because something deep inside her understood. That healing required tending, and some wounds needed to be exposed to light before they could mend. A week after their confrontation, she found Rosa waiting for her, with gardening gloves and a thermos of tea. "I thought you might need these," the older woman said, settling onto a stone bench that had been hidden beneath a tangle of vines. "Won't Damian be angry if he finds out you're helping me?" Rosa's smile was sad but knowing. "He was angry long before you came here, child. Anger has been his companion for 15 years. Maybe it's time he learned to live with something else." They worked together in comfortable silence until Rosa spoke again. "His mother used to bring him here when he was small. He'd sit right there." She pointed to a spot near the center of the garden. She'd tell him stories while she worked. He was a different boy than laughing, curious, full of light. "What happened to him after she died?" His father happened. Marcus Blackwood was a hard man who believed grief was weakness. He sent Damian away to boarding school within a month of the funeral. When the boy came home for holidays, he was quieter each time. By the time he graduated, he'd learned to bury his feelings so deep that I sometimes wonder if he remembers how to feel at all. Sophia pruned a particularly stubborn branch, thinking of the pain she'd seen in Damian's eyes. "He feels. Doesn't know what to do with it." "No," Rosa agreed. "He doesn't. But maybe you can teach him." That evening, Sophia made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going to the dining room, she asked Rosa to prepare a picnic dinner. As the sun began to set, she spread a blanket in the garden among the roses she'd been nurturing back to life. When Damian came looking for her, she was sitting cross-legged on the blanket, pouring wine into 2 glasses. "What is this?" "Dinner," she said simply. "I thought you might like to eat somewhere different for once." His face darkened. "I told you to stay away from here. I know what you told me. But I also know that avoiding this place won't bring your mother back or make your pain go away. Trust me, I've tried to outrun grief before. You don't understand. I understand perfectly." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight. "Lost my father too, remember? I know what it's like to carry guilt that isn't really yours to carry." Damian stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. "It's not the same, isn't it? You blame yourself for your mother's death because you forgot a school project. I blamed myself for my father's drinking because I thought if I'd been a better daughter, maybe he wouldn't have needed to escape his life so badly. That's different. Your father chose to drink. My mother died because of a terrible accident that had nothing to do with you being 12 years old and forgetful." Her voice was gentle but firm. "Damian, you were a child. Children forget things. It's not your fault." She watched him struggle with her words, saw the moment when 15 years of carefully constructed walls began to crack. "I was supposed to be at that science fair," he said, his voice barely audible. She was so proud, had her camera ready. "But I left my project in my locker, and she said she'd drive me back to get it. If I had just remembered, then maybe you both would have been in that car. Maybe you both would have died." Sophia stood slowly, approaching him like she would a wounded animal. "Your mother made a choice to help you because she loved you. Don't dishonor that love by spending your life punishing yourself for receiving it." Something broke in Damian's expression. The rigid control he'd maintained for so long finally cracked, and she saw the boy he'd been lost, frightened, drowning. In guilt he'd never learned to process. "I don't know how to let it go," he whispered. "Start by sitting with me. Let me show you what I've been working on." Slowly, hesitantly, he sank onto the blanket beside her. In the fading light, Sophia pointed out each small victory: the rose bush that had produced its first bud, the climbing vine that had found its way back to the trellis, the patch of earth where new growth was starting to push through. "Your mother had good instincts," Sophia said softly. "She chose strong varieties, planted them in the right soil. Even after all these years of neglect, the roots remember what they're supposed to do." Damian was quiet for a long time, studying the garden with new eyes. She used to say that roses were like people, they could survive almost anything if their roots were strong enough. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. He reached out tentatively, touching a small white rose that had bloomed despite the surrounding chaos. I haven't been in this garden since the day she died, and now. He looked at Sophia. Really? Looked at her, and she saw something she'd never seen before in his eyes. Not the cold calculation of a businessman or the burning anger of a man seeking revenge, but simple, honest vulnerability. Now I think maybe she wouldn't want me to let it die with her. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, surrounded by the quiet promise of things learning to grow again. And for the first time since their forced wedding, Sophia felt something that might have been hope taking root in her heart. Love in full bloom. The change in Damian didn't happen overnight, but it was unmistakable. He began joining Sophia in the garden, first just watching, then gradually helping. His hands, so accustomed to boardroom deals and corporate warfare, learned the gentle art of nurturing growth. You're doing it wrong, Sophia said one morning, trying not to smile as she watched him wrestle with a particularly stubborn weed. I'm a fast learner, Damian replied, but there was warmth in his voice now instead of ice. Learning requires admitting you don't know everything. He looked up at her, dirt smudged on his cheek, and Sophia felt her heart skip. When had he become handsome instead of merely intimidating? When had his rare smiles started to feel like sunshine? Then teach me, he said simply. Over the following weeks, they worked side by side as the garden transformed. Rosa observed their growing closeness with knowing smiles, often appearing, with fresh lemonade and convenient excuses to leave them alone together. The evening that changed everything came 3 months after their strange wedding. Sophia was putting away the gardening tools when she noticed Damian standing very still beside his mother's favorite rose bush, the one that had finally produced a single, perfect bloom. She would have loved this, he said softly. She would have loved seeing you happy, Sophia replied, moving to stand beside him. Am I happy? He turned to face her, and she saw wonder in his expression, as if the concept was foreign to him. Are you? Instead of answering, he reached out to touch her face, his thumb tracing her cheek with infinite tenderness. When I first saw you, all I could think about was making you pay for what your father did. I thought having you here, trapped in this life, would somehow balance the scales. And now I realize I was the one who was trapped. In anger, in grief, in the need for revenge that was eating me alive. His voice grew soft.
You saved me, Sophia.
You brought me back to life. We saved each other, she whispered. When he kissed her, it was nothing like she had imagined their first kiss would be. It wasn't desperate or demanding, but gentle and full of promise. It tasted like hope and new beginnings. I love you, he said against her lips, the words sounding rusty from disuse but absolutely sincere. I love you too, she replied, and meant it completely. 6 months later, they had a real wedding in the garden they'd restored together. Lena cried happy tears as she watched her daughter marry for love instead of debt. Rosa officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. The roses bloomed in abundance, as if celebrating alongside them. Vincent Torres, who had become a friend rather than just a lawyer, tore up the original contract in a ceremonial gesture that made everyone laugh. Some debts, he said with a grin, are paid in ways we never expect. As they danced their first dance among the roses, Damian whispered in Sophia's ear, My mother would have loved you. I wish I could have met her. You did, in a way. She's in every flower we planted, every moment of happiness we found here. She's in the fact that something beautiful grew from something so painful. Sophia looked around at their garden, at the family they'd chosen, at the life they'd built from. The ashes of tragedy and revenge. Do you think she's proud of us? Damian smiled, the real smile that had taken her months to earn, and that she treasured like the rarest bloom. I think she's proud that we learned what she tried to teach me all those years ago. What's that? That even the most damaged things can bloom again if they're given enough love. As the stars came out above their celebration, Sophia knew that some fairy tales don't begin with once upon a time. Some begin with heartbreak and loss, with debts that can't be paid, and wounds that seem too deep to heal. But the best ones? The ones worth living, they all end the same way, with love finding a way to grow, even in the darkest soil. 2 years later, as Sophia watched their daughter take her first steps among the roses, she understood that the most beautiful gardens are the ones that grow from the places where we thought nothing could ever bloom again. The end.